My name is Carolina Alves. I am a physician, a general surgeon and intensivist, with more than 20 years of dedication to medicine. Even today, after so many surgeries, after so many shifts that turned into true marathons, I must confess, the hospital remains a place where the unexpected never rests. Some say that, over time, we get used to dealing with the unpredictable, but that's not exactly true. We learn to stay in control, to act firmly, to decide quickly when every second matters, but, deep down, we remain human beings in front of other human beings. And believe me, that changes everything. When I chose medicine, still very young, I imagined that it would be enough to study, master the techniques, understand the protocols, that the scalpel, the exams, and the monitors would be enough to keep life in my hands. But over time, I realized that the hospital is more than science and technology. It is a space where life and death touch at every instant, where the joy of a birth can, minutes later, give way to the despair of an irreparable loss, where we learn, harshly, that even the most advanced knowledge has limits. And it is precisely at those limits that the stories begin, the stories that never leave our memory. Throughout my career, I have seen everything. I've seen patients arrive in critical condition and, against all odds, leave the hospital smiling days later. I've also witnessed the opposite, people who had everything in their favor and, for reasons we cannot explain, simply passed away. This unpredictability is not just a medical lesson, it is a life lesson. A constant reminder that we do not control everything, and that, often, we are merely witnesses of something greater than ourselves. But some situations, some remain etched in a different way. There are cases that mark not only the entire medical team but also each professional individually, forcing us to reflect far beyond science. They are episodes that remind us that behind masks, gloves, and coats, we are humans, trying to grasp the incomprehensible. And it is about one of these moments that I want to talk to you. A story that began like so many others, in a cold operating room, illuminated by powerful lights, surrounded by the constant sounds of machines and metallic instruments. Everything seemed to follow the normal course of yet another delicate procedure, absolutely within expectations. Until, suddenly, something happened. Something that none of the people present in that room, anesthesiologist, technicians, nurses, or myself, could have foreseen. An event that I still carry with me today, not only as a doctor but also as a human being. It wasn't just another clinical case. It was an episode that showed me, deeply, that science can be grand, but it is still not capable of explaining everything. And it is this story, lived by me and an entire team that night, that you are about to hear. Get ready to listen to the account of someone who was there, who witnessed every detail, and who still asks herself to this day, what really happened at that moment? He woke up. In the middle of the surgery. That is the sentence that still echoes in my mind. I know it sounds impossible, like something outside the realm of logic, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And that is precisely what makes this story so striking. Because it wasn't a legend, it wasn't a rumor whispered in the hallway. It was real. Before continuing, I want to ask you something. You who are listening to me now? I need this video to reach as many people as possible. Stories like this remind us that there are events in medicine that defy all scientific explanation. So, if you believe that miracles exist, write right now in the comments, I believe in miracles. I will read each message, and that also helps YouTube deliver this content to more people. I need at least 100 comments so this story does not get lost. So write down your faith, your curiosity, or even your doubt, but leave it recorded. And if you are not yet subscribed, take a moment to do it now. Here, I share real stories lived inside hospitals, in operating rooms, in ICS, in moments when life seems to slip through our fingers. And yet, something unexplainable happens. This is the place where science, humanity, and mystery meet. Now, take a deep breath with me. Picture the scene. A cold room, illuminated by surgical lights. The sound of machines filling the silence. The constant beep of the heart monitor. The hum of the ventilator. The low murmur of the team coordinating every move. The patient, anesthetized, lying on the table, surrounded by experienced hands moving with precision. Everything seems to follow the protocol. Everything seems under control. Until it no longer is. I have participated in hundreds of surgeries, and I always emphasize, anesthesia is one of the safest and most thoroughly studied areas of modern medicine. There is a whole team dedicated to ensuring that the patient remains unconscious, free from pain, protected from any memory of that moment. But that night, the unthinkable happened. The patient opened his eyes. Now think, what would you do if you were in my place? You, anesthesiologist, surgeon, nurse, any professional who dedicated their life to learning how to control every detail of such a delicate procedure. Suddenly, you see that motionless body. Wake up, but that wasn't all. Because what he said, right after opening his eyes, is what, to this day, no one, not me, not my colleagues, not even the specialists who later heard the account, has been able to explain. This is the story I will share with you. And don't expect a rational explanation, because I have not found one to this day. What I bring is the testimony of someone who was there. So stay with me until the end, because every detail matters. Every word spoken in that operating room still sends chills through me, as if it happened yesterday. And before we go on, remember, your participation is essential. Click subscribe, hit the bell, and write in the comments, I believe in miracles. I want to know if you, too, feel that there are moments when life surpasses any scientific limit. Because that night, that is exactly what happened. It was a Tuesday night. I had just come off a long shift, hours dragging inside the hospital. The operating room was ready for another procedure that, in theory, should not have brought major surprises. But it was precisely that night, seemingly ordinary, that something extraordinary happened. The patient was a 42-year-old man named Marcelo *. He had arrived at the hospital a few days earlier with severe abdominal pain. Exams revealed a complication requiring surgical intervention, an intestinal perforation caused by severe diverticulitis. It wasn't the most complex surgery I had ever performed, but it wasn't simple either. It carried serious risks, especially considering Marcelo was not exactly a healthy patient. He had a history of hypertension, was overweight, and like many Brazilians, had neglected his health until the pain forced him to seek help. When I met him for the first time, I remember the way he looked at me. His eyes were filled with fear, but also with a silent trust. It's something we doctors feel almost every day, that moment when the patient places not only their health, but their entire life, in our hands. I held his hand and said, "Everything will be fine. We are prepared to take care of you." He took a deep breath, as if that simple phrase was the thread of hope he needed at that moment. Before being taken to the operating room, Marcelo asked to see his wife. It was a scene that remains clear in my mind, like a photograph, him holding her hand, trying to appear strong, but with a trembling voice. He said, "If I don't come back, take care of our children." Those words struck me in a strange way. Every patient knows the risks of surgery, but they don't always voice the fear of never waking up again. I remember looking at the team and seeing the same serious expression. No one said anything, but we all felt the weight. Soon after, already in the operating room, the anesthesiologist began the procedure. Marcelo was induced into unconsciousness properly, monitored in every detail. His vital signs were stable, everything within normal range. The team was calm, focused, as always. The environment, despite the natural tension, seemed under control. What still strikes me today is how everything seemed aligned. There was no indication that anything out of the ordinary might happen. I was used to dealing with emergencies, but that night, everything was organized, almost to calm. Marcelo, in deep rest, was in our hands. I made the first incision with the steadiness that experience gives us. The surgical field was open, metallic instruments glinting under the intense lights. The team exchanged short, technical words, each fulfilling their role with precision. But as I worked, I couldn't get his last words to his wife out of my head. It's curious how, in the midst of so many surgeries, some words linger, echoing in our minds. It was as if that farewell carried something more than simple fear. I didn't know it yet, but those words would be only the beginning of a story that would completely change the way I see life, death, and what exists between the two. Marcelo's surgery progressed steadily. The procedure required caution, but at that moment, everything was going as expected. The perforated intestine had already been located, and we were preparing the area for repair. The team was in perfect sync. The anesthesiologist monitored every tiny variation in vital signs. The scrub nurses handed over the instruments without the need for many words, and I kept my full attention fixed on the surgical field. It was like so many other surgeries I had performed throughout my career. But as often happens in medicine, it only takes an instant for the situation to change completely. Suddenly, the monitors began to sound alarms. Marcelo's heartbeat showed a sharp change. First an acceleration, then a sudden drop. The anesthesiologist quickly adjusted the medication, trying to stabilize him. His breathing, which had been regular with the ventilator, became erratic in an unexpected way. "He's unstable," said the anesthesiologist, his voice firm but tense. In that moment, the atmosphere in the operating room shifted. The technical silence, previously filled only by the hum of machines, gave way to a tension so heavy it could almost be felt. Each member of the team assumed an even more focused posture. Conversations ceased. Every eye was fixed on Marcelo. I continued with the surgery, but I already felt that the scenario had become more dangerous. In situations like this, time seems to slow down. Every second stretches out. Every move must be calculated down to the millimeter. The smallest mistake can be fatal. Marcelo, unconscious, was fighting silently against something we could not see. His body showed signs of fragility, as if it were about to give up. While I controlled the local bleeding, I heard the heart monitor firing off irregular alarms. The anesthesiologist intensified his interventions, and we, at the surgical field, knew there was no room for failure. For several minutes, it was a silent battle against the invisible. I breathed deeply, trying to stay calm, even as I felt the pressure mounting. At times like this, it's not only technique that sustains a surgeon, it's also emotional discipline. The heart races, but the hands must remain steady. Then something even stranger happened. While we were focused on stabilizing Marcelo, I noticed an unexpected movement. His right arm, strapped and positioned alongside the surgical table, twitched. It isn't unusual that, in very rare cases, there may be small neuromuscular responses, even under anesthesia. But this movement was different. It was firm, conscious, almost intentional. Before we even had time to process it, the second shock came. His eyes opened. For a moment, I thought it was just a reflex, but no. Marcelo didn't just open his eyes, he fixed his gaze on me. The intensity of that moment was undeniable. I, used to seeing patients completely disconnected from reality under anesthesia, was now faced with someone who seemed fully awake in the middle of surgery. "This isn't possible," murmured the anesthesiologist, in disbelief, staring at the monitors that still showed levels consistent with deep anesthesia. The entire team froze. It felt as if time had stopped inside that room. The patient, who should have been unconscious, was there, awake, staring at us. And before anyone could react, he spoke. His voice came out weak, but clear enough for everyone to hear. It wasn't a groan, it wasn't a random sound. They were words. Words that, to this day, no one on the team has been able to explain. The operating room, which only moments before had been a stage of focus and technicality, now felt like the scene of something far greater. We were all paralyzed. The scalpel in my hand hovered in the air as I tried to comprehend what I was witnessing. Marcelo, the patient under general anesthesia, had opened his eyes and was looking directly at me. It wasn't a lost gaze, nor the unconscious stare of a reflex. It was aware, deep, charged with something I couldn't name. It was as if, for a moment, he had crossed the barrier between unconsciousness and wakefulness to tell us something. The anesthesiologist kept repeating, almost as if trying to convince himself, "This is not possible. The levels are fine, he shouldn't be conscious." But there Marcelo was, defying everything we had learned, everything science had taught us to expect. The tension was almost unbearable. The team exchanged glances in silence, each one waiting for me, as the lead, to make a decision. But before any action could be taken, it happened. He spoke. Again, his voice was low, hoarse, but perfectly audible. Not moans, not incoherent sounds, full sentences, as if he had complete awareness of what he was saying. "Time is running out." The words echoed through the room as if they carried a supernatural weight. The heart monitor beeped irregularly, as if his body itself was responding to the very words his mouth had just spoken. The anesthesiologist looked at me, pale. The scrub nurses stepped back slightly, as if they needed distance from that moment. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was just a neurological discharge, a fragment of consciousness surfacing at the wrong time. But no, his eyes remained fixed, steady, as if he meant exactly what he had said. And then, without anyone expecting it, he continued, "You don't understand. But I must warn you." At that second, there was no more air in the room. Absolute silence. The only sounds were the monitor alarms and the pounding of our own hearts. I, so used to seeing the fragile line between life and death, felt vulnerable, small, before what I was witnessing. He blinked slowly, as if exhausted, but still gathered strength to say one more sentence. A sentence that completely changed the way we looked at that case. "But I won't reveal it just yet." What came out of Marcelo's mouth, lying there on that table under anesthesia, was something so out of context, so prophetic, that it made the entire team believe we had witnessed something impossible to explain through medicine. Alone. And this is exactly what you need to hear from me until the end of this video, because what he said, no one in that room has forgotten to this day. Marcelo remained motionless on the operating table, but his eyes were open, fixed on me. It wasn't the gaze of someone confused, lost between consciousness and the fog of anesthesia. There was clarity, intention. It was as if he had awakened solely to deliver a message and nothing else. The entire room seemed suspended in time. Even the sound of the machines felt different, as if the environment itself had paused to listen to those words. I instinctively moved closer, unable to look away from his eyes. That was the moment he said, with an impossible firmness for someone in his condition, "Do not be afraid. It is not yet my time." The phrase echoed like thunder in the absolute silence of the room. It was impossible not to feel the weight of those words. It wasn't just a statement. It sounded like a warning, almost a prophecy. The anesthesiologist looked at the monitors, stunned. The readings still indicated deep anesthesia. There was no rational explanation for him to be awake, let alone form complete, meaningful sentences. Marcelo continued, still weak, but clear, "I will return. And when I return, it will be to tell what I have seen." A chill ran down my spine. And I wasn't the only one. The scrub nurse beside me stepped back, visibly shaken. The silence of the team reflected not only fear but also reverence for something that surpassed any medical logic. At that moment, Marcelo closed his eyes again. His body relaxed, as if he had exhausted every ounce of strength keeping him awake. The monitors showed a brief instability, then quickly stabilized again. The anesthesiologist, still stunned, adjusted a few parameters, almost trying to convince himself that everything was under control. But we all knew, what had just happened was not normal. I continued the surgery, my hands steady, but inside me, something had shifted. I couldn't stop thinking about his words. "It is not yet my time." And that final promise, "I will return." The atmosphere in the room was no longer the same. We weren't just performing a procedure anymore. We were witnessing something none of us dared to voice aloud. As I finished the repair, every second seemed charged with a deeper meaning, as if we were mere spectators of a story beyond our comprehension. And deep down, we all knew, those words would echo far beyond. That night, when Marcelo closed his eyes again, the operating room sank into an even heavier silence. It was as if everyone was waiting for something supernatural to happen next. But, strangely, his vital signs stabilized. The heart monitor returned to a steady rhythm, the assisted breathing remained regular, and suddenly, we were staring at a paradox. Everything in his body seemed under control, but what had just happened lay far beyond explanation. I took a deep breath and whispered, almost to myself, but loud enough for the team to hear, "Let's continue." And so we did. Every movement of the scalpel, every suture, every instrument handed over seemed heavier that night. I was no longer just performing a surgery. I was fighting to keep my focus in the midst of a feeling that something invisible was watching us. The anesthesiologist remained attentive, but I noticed his restless eyes. He was a seasoned professional, used to extreme situations. And yet, in that moment, he looked as unsettled as the rest of us. The scrub nurse, usually unshakable, was visibly nervous, biting her lip as she passed the tools. We finished the intestinal repair, cleaned the cavity, and began closing. Technically, the surgery had gone well. Marcelo had endured the procedure. But none of us left that room feeling as if it had truly ended. When we moved him to the recovery room, the team was still in shock. The anesthesiologist was the first to break the silence. "I swear, there's no explanation. Ways in critical moments before, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what we had witnessed that night." As I headed to write the operative report, a single phrase kept repeating in my mind, "It is not yet my time. I will return." Those words had been spoken with such absolute certainty that they echoed inside me like a warning. And the most disturbing thought was this: return. From where? The surgery was over, but the mystery was only beginning. Marcelo was taken to the post-anesthesia care unit, still intubated, closely monitored. His vital signs were surprisingly stable, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. To any other doctor or nurse not present in the OR, he was just another post-op patient, asleep under medication. But to us, who had witnessed the impossible, nothing felt normal. I remember staying by his bed for several minutes, studying his face. There was a strange calmness in his expression. It was as if he were at peace. And yet, in my mind, his words still echoed endlessly. "It is not yet my time. I will return." The anesthesiologist, calmer now, but still shaken, whispered softly, "This can't go into the report. No one would believe it. They'd think we lost our minds." And he was right. How could we possibly explain in a medical document that a patient under deep general anesthesia had opened his eyes, spoken coherent sentences, and then returned to unconsciousness without any apparent aftereffects? There was no way. Science offered no framework for it. The team dispersed slowly, each one carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. On every face, I saw the same thing: the need for silence. No one dared put into words what was already engraved in memory. Hours later, in the ICU bed, Marcelo began to wake up. The process was gradual, as expected. First light movements, then spontaneous breathing, until finally, his eyes opened. This time, it was natural, like any patient recovering from anesthesia. I was at his side when it happened. He blinked a few times, took a deep breath, and with a faint voice, asked, "Is it over?" I answered with a restrained smile, "Yes, Marcelo, it's over." And everything went well. He nodded, closed his eyes again, and went back to rest. In that moment, I knew he remembered nothing. There was no trace of awareness about what had happened during surgery. To him, it was just another medical procedure, another anesthesia from which he was slowly waking up. But for us, it was impossible to forget. In the following days, Marcelo's recovery was surprisingly quick. Despite the severity of his condition, his progress was positive. He walked the hallway sooner than expected, resumed eating without major issues, and even smiled at the staff as if nothing unusual had ever happened. But every time I saw him, a chill ran through me. Because behind that serene face, I carried the memory of what he had said. And the question none of us dared to ask aloud: had he really been somewhere else? Had he seen something we couldn't see? The anesthesiologist, always rational, came to me privately one day. He said, "I can't stop thinking about those words." It was as if he knew something we don't. I only nodded in silence, because deep down, I felt the same way. Marcelo was discharged a little over a week later. He left walking, with his wife and children by his side, smiling, thanking all of us. For him, life had moved on. But for us, the doctors and nurses in that room, the episode became an invisible scar. Because the truth was, the surgery was finished, the patient had survived, but the story was far from over. After Marcelo's discharge, life at the hospital went on. New cases arrived, more surgeries needed to be performed, and, as always, we were swallowed up by the relentless routine that never lets us stop for long. But inside me, and I'm certain inside each person who was in that operating room, something had changed. I have always been a woman of science. I dedicated decades of my life to study, to practice, to exhaustive training. I learned that medicine is built on logic, protocols, and statistics, that every decision must be based on evidence, never on guesswork. That discipline has saved lives and continues to save them every single day. But how can I explain what we saw? How can I rationalize something that defies every manual, every calculation, every certainty medicine gives us? That night, in front of Marcelo, I realized that there are to admit, we don't always know, we don't always understand. I recall a conversation with the anesthesiologist a few days later. He told me, if someone else had told me this story, I wouldn't believe it. I'd say it was exaggeration, invention, a trick of memory. But I was there, I saw it, I heard it. That marked me deeply. Because it's easy to doubt when you hear it from the outside. But when you are there, when you witness it with your own eyes and ears, there's no way to deny it. And maybe that's exactly what still unsettles me to this day. The fact that Marcelo seems to have no memory of what happened. He doesn't recall the words he spoke. For him, it was just a surgery. But for us, it was a reminder that there is a dimension of human experience that goes beyond flesh, beyond scalpels, beyond machines. I am not a religious woman, but I cannot deny that, in certain situations, I think about faith. I think about how some things simply aren't meant to fit within our explanations. Maybe life has ways of manifesting itself that we do not yet understand. Maybe consciousness goes far beyond the brain we study in such detail. What Marcelo said on that table, "It is not yet my time, I will return," was not just a phrase. It was a declaration of something he seemed to know. And that alone is both terrifying and fascinating. Even today, every time I enter an operating room, I remember that episode. I remember that no matter how much we master technique, no matter how far science advances, we still face mysteries. And, in a way, that is what makes medicine so profoundly human. The humility to recognize that we don't have all the answers. And I confess, a part of me is still waiting for the day Marcelo returns to tell me what he saw, what remained hidden between life and the unexplainable. This is the story I needed to share with you. Not because I have an explanation, but precisely because I don't. Because even now, when I remember Marcelo's eyes opening in the middle of surgery, and those words leaving his mouth under full anesthesia, I feel the same chill that ran through my body that night. Medicine has taught me so much. It has taught me to respect science, to value every data point, every protocol, every technology that saves lives every day. But it has also taught me something else, that life does not fit entirely into books, tests, or reports. There is a dimension that escapes our control, that goes beyond scalpels and monitors, and that, once in a while, manifests before us like a whisper of the unexplainable. Marcelo survived. He went home, reunited with his family, carried on with life as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But we, who were there, know that night was anything but ordinary. It was a brutal reminder that there are things that cannot be measured or catalogued. It was a call to realize that, even inside an operating room, where everything seems under control, there are still forces we do not comprehend. And maybe it is precisely that mix of science and mystery that keeps my vocation alive. Because in the end, I am not just a doctor. I am also a witness to something that goes beyond flesh, beyond anesthesia, beyond the human body. If this story touched you, if you believe there are moments that escape all logical explanation, leave your comment. Right. I believe in miracles. I want to know how many of you also feel that life is much greater than what we can see. And if you are not yet them.